Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Astro Consciousness channel. I'm Millie, and I am here to give you your forecast for the solar eclipse in Libra taking place on October 2nd. In this channel, I talk to you about the astrological energy of the week ahead and how you can integrate it into your personal and spiritual growth. So we are nearing, right, the second eclipse of the season. And I think that an important thing to remember before I move into talking about the aspects of the solar eclipse is the fact that a lot of what I'm going to talk about, I think that for a lot of people, the manifestations of this have already happened, um, as is the case during eclipse seasons. So very rarely do things tend to manifest for people exactly on the day of eclipses. It is usually around the events that significant things take place that let you know, oh, this is something that has changed in my life permanently, right? That doesn't mean that there's always a severing of something or someone in your life, right? Out of your life, a relationship. But it does imply that there is a significant shift. And in this case, because we're going to talk about Libra, a significant permanent shift in the dynamic of a relationship where you know that the relationship is probably never going to be the same again. And this can be in relationship again to someone else, but this can be in relationship to yourself, in relationship to your work, in relationship to where you live, in relationship to your thoughts, to your belief systems, to your health, to your body, to your daily routine. There is something here that you are being called to have a completely different relationship with in order for you to honor living in integrity with yourself. And so living in integrity with yourself can mean, oh, I realize that my health isn't the way that it used to be and that I have neglected it a little bit. And when I went to the doctor confirmed it. So there's a significant shift that I need to make. Otherwise, this is going to have, um, you know, not the greatest consequences, right? And so the understanding of, okay, the relationship to my body needs to be different. And that's just an example, not medical advice, right? The relationship to my work needs to be different in terms of, am I giving so much more than I need to because there is a need to be validated or praised or seen in a certain way? And am I doing that from a place of joy or from a place of a should? That I should do these things because this is what I need to do. When it comes to relationships with others, again, for some people, an important relationship in their life, the dynamic has truly shifted. And for others, this is something that's going to continue to unfold either over the next month or over the next 6 months. Okay. Now, similarly to what I did last week, I'm going to share my screen so that we can look at the solar eclipse in Libra. So here we have the sun and the moon together at 10 degrees Libra, which in itself is such a Libra, it's such a Libra thing. The sun and the moon represent the masculine and the feminine. They represent the yin and the yang, right? And Libra is all about that. It's about finding the harmony and the balance between the masculine and the feminine. So as we move through, especially the next month, we are going to take note of, I think, a lot of like the give and the take, or simply the input and the output of energy in our relationships, and begin to take notice as to how that affects us. And here's why. Because here we have the South Node in Libra, and the South Node in Libra is at 6 degrees Libra. We have a new moon eclipse, which, by the way, is a solar eclipse. So those two, you might either hear it as a new moon eclipse or a solar eclipse. Those two terms are interchangeable. And the South Node at 6 degrees Libra is telling us, in order for us to have this significant new beginning, of a solar eclipse, which, by the way, the last time that we had a solar eclipse with the south node there in the sign of Libra, which, by the way, was also at 10 degrees Libra, was October of 2005. And we don't always have south node solar eclipses in the same degree of a particular sign. That is something really interesting. And it's important to understand that because we have to think back to how much the way we have done relationships has changed since then till now. But what we're really paying attention to right now is the South Node in Libra saying that in order for there to be a new beginning in the types of relationships that we want to nurture, that we want to attract, there needs to be a significant ending to the way that we have done relationships thus far. Because this is in the sign of Libra, I think that the way that we might go about this might actually be from a space of, I understand that you and I are in somewhat different timelines. And not from a place of, I'm good and you're bad. I'm right and you're wrong. This is your fault. I've done all the work and I know better. And if it is translating into that, that is something that I think we need to pay very, very close attention to, because that's not what the energy of Libra is about. The energy of Libra, when it is in true harmony and balance, it is about the accepting of, again, we get to be in different timelines with the people that we are in relationship with, and that gets to inform us the degree to which we want to continue relating to this particular person. Let's say that this has to do with something like career. It's a different example, but I think it's worth mentioning because we have Pluto in Capricorn, and I'll get into what that means in a second. But just because we have had a relationship with a career or a job for a certain period of time doesn't mean that we have to continue having the same relationship with that career just because we've been doing it for so long. And a lot of times people tend to make the decision to stay in a place based on how long they've been there because they feel that what they're going to lose out on is far bigger than the possibility of what's out there for them. And that South Node in Libra is reminding us that we need to truly part ways with one of the lower expressions of Libra, which is, I'm going to continue in something because it looks good. Libra is an energy that can tend to manifest in doing things because it looks good, right? So I'm not going to get a divorce because that looks bad. I'm not going to quit my career because that looks bad because I have invested so much time in it already. That's not what we're talking about here. When we're talking about the South Node, we're talking about following our soul's path, purpose, and timeline. And when we're thinking about it from a space of should or being afraid of what's on the other side, we are only limiting the expression of our soul. We are only limiting the expression of ourselves. What I really like about this is that Mercury, the planet of cognitive thought, the planet of communication, but most importantly, the planet of perception, of how we perceive ourselves and therefore how we perceive life, is also in the sign of Libra. And it's not too far away from that South Node in Cancer. This is Mercury at 11 degrees Libra, and it is only 5 degrees away from that South Node. What that tells me is that the way that we have thought about balance, the way that we have perceived ourselves in relationship to our lives or in relationship to the people in our lives is transforming. And that's a really, really big deal. Why? Because the ruler of Libra is Venus, and Venus at the time of the solar eclipse is in the sign of Scorpio. So when we look at the order in which signs take place in the zodiac, Libra comes before Scorpio. Both Libra and Scorpio are signs that have a lot to do with relationships, but variant degrees of relationships. So while Libra represents the union of two people through contract, which can look like marriage or can look like agreement or can look like a lease or can look like a collaboration or a partnership of some sort other than romantic, Scorpio, being the sign that follows Libra, says, okay, this is the surface of this relationship, right? Which can be the marriage, for instance. Let's take that for as an example. But Venus and Scorpio is saying, but what is our intimacy like? What happens behind closed doors between the both of us? What are those contracts that we have made with one another that aren't visible to the rest of the world? Sometimes may not even be visible to us, but that for the most part, we understand the agreements between what we have amongst ourselves. So Venus and Scorpio, I think, is really fascinating that the ruler of this eclipse is in the sign of Scorpio, because this is a no BS type of energy. With the South Node in Libra is we are releasing this need to sacrifice ourselves, to abandon ourselves in some way, shape, or form in order to keep the peace, in order to be chosen, in order to fit in. And that's what the South Node has highlighted for all of us in some area of our life, but especially our relationships, since July of 2023. And here we have a solar eclipse, which we have not experienced since 2005, where the ruler is in the sign of Scorpio, and it's saying, this level of intimacy, this degree of intimacy is going to look a lot differently, and it's going to be much more honest. And this isn't about trying to make someone something they are not. This isn't about forcing myself in a situation that deep down, Scorpio, deep down, I know I don't want, but I somehow continue contributing to my own misery. The South Node in Libra is so much of that. It's so much about taking self-responsibility around how much do I contribute to the chaos, imbalance, and misery in my own life. And look, I know that that doesn't sound great, but that's the energy of the South Node, to highlight the things that we keep wanting to bury, that we keep wanting to ignore some way, somehow. And with Mercury in Libra, right next to the sun, the moon, and the South Node, this is something that cognitively in our minds, we cannot ignore no matter how much we try. And Venus in Scorpio is actually loving that. Every planet in every sign has a gift. And the gift of Venus and Scorpio is to go beyond the surface, in order to find the truth of who we are, and with the understanding that the truth of who we are comes with a shadow. When we are able to understand our own shadow, we are better able to understand the shadow of other, but that doesn't mean that we have to go in and fix it. And that's what the South Node there is trying to let us know. The South Node in Libra, I think, has shown a lot of us the fixer in us. And when we move into relationships trying to be the fixer, and even in the relationship with ourselves, where we're constantly trying to, air quotes, fix ourselves, fix a certain part of our life, there's a lot of efforting that's taking place, and we're not allowing for the wisdom of the experience to come through in the way that it needs to. So Venus in Scorpio is about the allowing of relationships to really show us what they are, people really showing us who they are, and us being very, very honest about whether we want to continue in those dynamics or not. And giving ourselves the permission to not. Pluto in Capricorn really plays such a big role in the shoulds of this season, right? This eclipse season has shown us so much about how we live under certain shoulds. I should be here at this part of my life. I should have done things differently. I should know what to do already. I should have it all figured out. And what Pluto retrograde in Capricorn is showing us is no, no, that's not the case. What happens when you should all over yourself? What happens when you should all over yourself? You put yourself between a rock and a hard place because that is not the natural evolution of learning something new. Okay, so, okay, let's go back to Venus in Scorpio. Venus in Scorpio is very well supported by Saturn retrograde in Pisces. Now, Saturn retrograde in Pisces, it is about accepting the responsibility, right? Responsibility, our ability to respond, that something has come to an end. Okay? The last sign of the zodiac is Pisces. It tends to represent something significant and a significant chapter ending, coming to an end. Now, that doesn't mean that relationships have to end. It's just that the dynamic from which they used to function from is coming to an end. And Venus and Scorpio being supported by that Saturn and Pisces is about being grounded, Saturn, in that ending, Pisces. And Venus and Scorpio saying, okay, yes, I can accept that that part of the relationship has come to an end. And I'm ready for something much deeper, and I'm ready for something much more meaningful, and I'm ready for something that feels more intimate, right? Not just physically and sexually, but something that feels where I'm meeting the other soul to soul. This is like going from the honeymoon phase of a relationship into a much more significant part of the relationship, right? Another supporting component to this Venus in Scorpio is Mars in Cancer. And Mars in Cancer is about what is worth fighting for. Mars always in our charts is going to show us how we fight for something, how we go after things, right? The relationship that we have to our anger, how we express our anger, our rage. And Mars in Cancer is about how do I fight for what is going to nourish me, right? How do I fight for? How do I really protect, more so than fight, really protect Mars, what is going to nourish me and bring a sense of pure love into my life? Cancer. So between Venus and Scorpio, Saturn and Pisces, and Mars and Cancer, we have what's called a grand water trine. And grand water trines in the zodiac remind us of the things in our lives that help transform us at a soul level, but also help heal us at a soul level. So this grand water trine is truly like a balm to the soul. Is truly that energy that connects us with, it's okay. It's okay because I trust in something bigger. It's okay because I know that this shift is for our well-being in the long run. I know that if I have this conversation with you, our relationship is going to be better for it. I know that if I change the relationship with this part of my life, I'm going to be better for it. My health is going to be better for it. My mental health is going to be better for it. There is something that we are meant to significantly change the relationship with in order to have more harmony in our lives. Now, what I mean by that is that we are meant to be in our lives with the things that truly feel in harmony with our soul, with what our soul is wanting at the moment. And that requires radical honesty. And that is why Venus in Scorpio is I think, one of the most important components, one of the more important placements of this chart, of this eclipse, because we need to be radically honest with ourselves, and this eclipse is going to bring it out. And then there's going to, something inside of us is going to say, and I cannot be in relationship with another unless it's from that space. I think that for some people that can feel like very all or nothing, but that is the energy of Scorpio. It's very all or nothing. And while there can be an invitation to be flexible around certain things, when we look at the big picture of where we are headed as a collective, especially between 2025 and 2026, we have to truly choose and understand the responsibility of choice that we have in our lives to be in relationship with certain people, and how we can no longer play the victim when we find ourselves in situations or in relationships in which we are unhappy. I don't know how that lands for some of you, but this is the power of solar eclipses. This is what they represent. And the intention that we set with the solar eclipse, whether it's actually you doing like a intention setting exercise, or simply with the decisions that we're making, we are setting ourselves up for the long run. Now, another important component of the solar eclipse is the fact that Pluto retrograde in Capricorn is creating a trine to Uranus retrograde in Taurus. The combination of Pluto and Uranus together is a transformative revolution taking place in a way where we feel like the ground can be, shook from underneath us. Because here we have these two earth signs, we have Capricorn and we have Taurus, that in the zodiac generally represent a sense of grounding, a sense of stability, a sense of safety. But these two planets creating a trine to one another represent that they are working together so well to transform a lot of the foundations in our lives and in our relationships. This is what we call a paradigm shift, right? So Pluto retrograde in Capricorn is telling us that which used to represent something sustainable over time, that is not how it's going to be 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. And again, this is different for different people in different parts of their lives. But let's say, again, let's stick to the example of relationship, because it's probably the one that is the most relatable. The way that we, resolve conflict in relationships is now, and the way that we're meant to do it now and from this point on is not the way that we were taught, when we were younger, if we were taught that at all. It's not going to be the way that we saw our parents resolve conflict. And that may seem like a very obvious example, but it isn't. For a lot of people, it isn't. I think that for anyone who, likes astrology, follows astrology, they're probably also into other branches of wellness. A lot of times we can live in a bubble and we forget that there are people outside of that mindfulness wellness bubble that absolutely still live in their relationships under the, societal rules, societal norms, right? That resolve conflict, or perhaps don't, because that's what they were taught, right? From a previous generation, which clearly the cosmos are showing us that is no longer the way we do things anymore. And so the trine between Pluto retrograde in Capricorn to Uranus retrograde in Taurus is saying those things may have brought you a sense of safety and grounding, but that's not going to be the case anymore, because it can't. Because this paradigm shift, this elevation in consciousness requires that we take much more responsibility for ourselves, for our soul evolution, for our self-awareness, before we can expect another to come in and fix it and make us feel better and help us soothe the part of ourselves that only we are responsible for soothing ourselves. This solar eclipse in Libra is checking us. It's checking us in a way where we have to be very honest about how much we have contributed to the disharmony or the imbalance in the relationships in our lives. And this isn't coming from a place of self-righteousness, not at all. Because I think that we have all have had to check that within ourselves and really make a promise to ourselves. I am not going to make myself smaller for anyone. I am not going to keep my mouth shut anymore just so that we can keep the peace when that, when that alleged keeping peace is making me miserable inside. These are the very real things that we are talking about that have been perpetuated time and time and time again from generation to generation, just so that we can say that this relationship or this institution of relationship looks a certain way. And so both Pluto and Uranus, that's what they are revolutionizing. Because when we begin to ask ourselves, well, how do I want to do things? How do I want to relate? What do I want to say? What do I bring? And we begin to honor those things. We begin to create a different relationship with ourselves and a different relationship with others. Another important component in the chart, and it's actually quite a sensitive component, is Chiron and Aries creating a square to Mars in Cancer. So I would not be surprised, especially between now and the month of January, if a lot of family inner child wounding gets triggered when it comes to the rebalancing of important relationships in our lives. Because we have Chiron and Aries. Aries is ruled by Mars. And what is Mars doing? Mars is in the sign of Cancer, the sign of family, of mother, of unconditional love, of our family experience growing up, and even of our ancestry. And so here we have these two very sensitive points in an aspect of tension to one another, that in a chart during an event that says the way you do relationships is going to change, and how much of our inner child wounding, of our trauma, of all of our things, we know this. It tends to come out in relationships. And because of our lack of self-awareness, we tend to expect our partner to fix it in some way, shape, or form, forgetting that they are on their own path and that they are on their own journey. This Chiron square Mars, I think has the potential for a lot of wisdom, as any square does, because squares are catalysts for change. So whatever is activated or triggered by that square, there lies the answer of where change needs to happen in a particular relationship. But because both Aries and Chiron are such sensitive points when they're not integrated, and they're very reactive points in our charts when they are not integrated, that I think that a lot is going to come out in that. And look, this isn't like, I'm not just here warning you. This is valuable information, so that when you observe or experience a reactivity in yourself or in another, perhaps you can remember to take a step back and say, who is this? Is this present day me, adult me? Or is this a younger version of myself? Or is this a younger version of my partner, right? Am I hearing them, or am I hearing a different version that we're not sure is here in the room with us, right? One of the questions that my therapist shared with me that has helped me ground and understand where I'm coming from, especially when heavy things are happening in my life, is who's in the room right now? And when I ask myself that, is so that I can understand where I'm coming from. Is it my wounded inner child? Is it my angry teenager? Is it my lost 20-year-old, right? Who's in the room right now? Who's making the decisions right now? Who's speaking for me right now? Because when I come back to present day self, I trust myself. I trust my judgment. I trust my intuition. But that isn't always who comes up, because we have different parts of us, right? For anyone who's done parts work in therapy, it's life-changing. And you know this. When you understand the parts of you that are at work at any given moment, you can give time and space to that part of you while understanding that the wise you that has done all of that work is also present in the room. And so, again, a solar eclipse in Libra with this conjunct the South Node is about, what is the relationship to my wounds? What is the relationship to my triggers? Am I approaching life and the relationships in my life from a place of my wounding or the place of my wisdom? I think that this Chiron square Mars is also one of the aspects of this chart that I find truly fascinating, because again, there's a lot of wisdom in there, and it requires that we pay attention to what's happening, to, again, what parts of us are showing up, in order to be able to recognize the wisdom that lies in there. One more thing I wanted to mention that I forgot to mention a little earlier is that in the groundwater trine, Mars is creating, obviously, a trine to Saturn in Pisces. Mars in Cancer, Saturn in Pisces. Whenever Saturn and Mars come together in any connection, the energy of Saturn is always going to win. So what do I mean by that? Mars is an energy that is very jovial, can be very young, very reactive. It's very fast moving. It doesn't have much forethought. And Saturn is the planet of time. It's Chronos, right? It is father time. It is that wisdom that comes through experience. Anytime these two planets meet, it is about remembering that this progress, that this movement, which are Mars themes, is going to take some time, especially because Saturn is retrograde. And with Saturn is retrograde, we have to integrate certain things. I want to remind you of that because this is something that's going to take time. This is something that is really going to, we really have to move with it step by step. And the reason that Saturn reminds us of that is because we have to have the responsibility, Saturn, to pay attention to where we are being called to move forward next. Because whenever, again, Mars and Saturn are connected, that's the cosmos saying, you're not just moving in this particular direction just because. you're moving in a direction that is intentional to who you are being now. And that's so, so important because it does add intention to our decision making and to how we move forward with our lives. Okay. So I hope that was helpful. May this be of service. For those who haven't purchased the eclipse guide, I invite you to, because there's still one more month to this eclipse season. And I think it's important for you to understand all of the components at play. But with that said, I will talk to you next week. Much love.